Welcome everyone. So this slide is covering our agenda for today. So the first 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the project, go through introductions, introduce the team and other people that are here, talk about the project location, the purpose of the project scope. Also, we actually developed some sidewalk concepts just to start generating some conversations about the possible layouts and to understand maybe some of the design and construction impacts. So we'll talk about some of those. Then we'll touch upon the timeline and some next steps, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with all of you, and definitely encourage everyone to present comments, input, feedback, and questions, and we'll try to address them the best we can. We value all of your input, and we appreciate all of you being here. So a little bit about the team here. My name again is Chris Wall. I actually have an office at the City Hall, but I actually work with a consultant called Wade Trim. The Wade Trim team operates under a contract with the City of Ann Arbor, where we support the city on different projects assigned to us. And so we were lucky enough to have Newport Sunset Sidewalk assigned. We also have with us Kayla, who, as you heard in the beginning, is our community engagement specialist. So thank you for being here, Kayla. On the Wade Trim team, we have Carmel Trimley, who is a main project engineer. We have Brianna Anderson, also a project engineer with the team, and then Martin Homke. We also have Nick Hutchinson, the city engineer here. We didn't put his contact information, but he is up on the screen, and he's here to help with any questions and clarifications. Kayla, do you recall if there's, or see if there's any ward members or council members here? Just would be nice to point them out if anyone's here yet.
I don't see any council members at this time. I'm scanning our participant list. If any council members are present that would like to introduce themselves, if I've missed you, please go ahead and do that now. I think we're all right to move ahead, Chris, but I'll keep an eye out and see if any join.
Thank you. So just a quick overview of the project location. We're looking at putting sidewalk on the east side of Newport, from down up Circle all the way down to Sunset. And then on the north side of Sunset Road, from Newport Road down to Brooks Vesper intersection. So that's the limits of the project. Many people ask about the purpose and the need for this. This project has actually been identified as a high priority project to fill sidewalk gaps in the city. There's more information at that link if you're interested in how that is developed, but also we have Nick here that can also provide some input on that if interested. But the project is intended to fill the sidewalk gap, help move us towards the Vision Zero goal of the city, address the transportation plan, and also be a complete streets and comply with the policy that the Ann Arbor is pursuing. It's also to improve pedestrian safety, provide a continuous user experience along the sidewalk segment, encourage active transportation by improving, as well as improving community health by using that sidewalk, and just provide more options for that transportation initiative. This truly would provide connections to the parks, the school, and as well as some transit. Just overall, it's providing much more accessibility and equitable solution for the residents and people around the city that would like to use these facilities. Also, I have been I've been receiving comments and emails, phone calls about the project in the last couple weeks. And one of the questions that was raised is this a done deal? And I just want to kind of address that a little bit, and Nick can maybe clarify if I don't provide enough clarity in my own response, but it's kind of a mix of yes and no. The project has been identified as a high priority, addresses many of the city goals. It was planned for in the capital improvement project. It's been funded. The funding has been secured for. The project is identified for construction next year, 2022. And we've been tasked with, this team has been tasked with gathering public input on the project, and to use it in the design and project decision-making. But ultimately, the city council will vote and decide on the contract on whether to move this project forward. I don't know, Nick, is there any addition, or is it?
I think you covered that pretty well for now, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you. So again, this is a slide on the project area. This kind of shows the gap in the sidewalk that we're addressing on this project. The blue shows the existing sidewalks, and then you'll see some orange of segments that haven't been addressed yet. So this project specifically focuses on access to the park, actually both parks, as well as on Sunset and Newport. There is a future project that is being included on Brook Street, which we'll touch upon later, but that is also going to address some public sidewalk gaps. We thought it would be a good point to discuss right-of-way and easements first, just so people understand kind of the easements that are on their property, as well as the right-of-way, especially since we're going to use those type of terms. So kind of going through some of the definitions here. So road right-of-way is property that's owned by the city and includes the road and extension of the pavement behind it. Many times in this area, we'll see grass and landscaping and trees. Sidewalks are usually located within the road right-of-way. On Newport, this road right-of-way varies. It varies over the freeway. Has a variable width on the south side, south of the freeway, as well as north. Sunset has a road right-of-way width of about 66 feet. We're also use the term permanent public easement. That's a section of the property that the city uses to enter or exit, but it's still privately owned. For example, it could be a permanent sidewalk easement that allows public to walk along that sidewalk, but it's not still on private property. Definitely the case on the existing condition on Sunset. There's permanent utility easements that allows the city to install utilities and maintain those utilities. And generally, the city tries to keep those easements clear for maintenance purposes. We also have temporary grading easements. And that's a section of the property that the city and the contractor can enter during a specified time for the construction. And in the case of a sidewalk project, it would be to try to transition and smooth the grades of that sidewalk onto the adjacent property. You can almost look at it as a rental. It's a temporary rental of this property to be able to access it and grade and smooth out the ground. And once the construction is done, that the grading permit is, the temporary grading easement is done. So it's completed. This slide shows existing right-of-way and some of the easements along the property and along the project limits. You'll see these red lines are actually the right-of-way. So the yellow line, or the yellow shading here and the yellow shading here, that's Sunset and Newport Road. And then the red lines are basically the right-of-way limits. Along Sunset and part of Newport, there's actually a private easement for public utilities. And then on a long portion of Sunset, there's currently a public easement for city utilities. For I know there's a sanitary sewer there, and then there's some storm sewer, or I'm sorry, water main as well that serves the water treatment plant. So the primary scope of the project, the main elements that that are part of this project are obviously to construct a new sidewalk on the east side of Newport and the north side of Sunset. Adding some new crosswalks, one at Donup Circle, one at Cooley Street, some at Newport Sunset intersection, Pomona Road, and then the Brooks Vesper intersection. As well as in some places, looking at maybe installing some retaining walls to try to minimize disturbance on the trees and disturbance on properties. The funding for the project is through kind of a long name, but we have some federal funding through the Surface Transportation Program urban funding. And those funds come through and we have to administer those through the Michigan Department of Transportation. So this project will be designed by the city, but a bid through MDOT to the contractors. And so there's a coordination that needs to take place between those agencies. The recently approved new sidewalk millage will also help fund this project. Many of the projects before this funding was in place, the city would be asking to put the sidewalk in, but also have those residents pay for part of that construction. So given this new millage, having the residents pay for that, the frontage of the work along their frontage is no longer needed. Now we'll walk down Newport and Sunset Road using some Google images that we have. Obviously, these images, we don't have one for every foot along the project. It's just kind of give a snapshot for the feel of what we're seeing on the road. It's not all encompassing. We apologize if we missed something that you deem important, but please, when we get to the Q&A session, please let us know about some critical areas that we deserve some focus. But this is generally to show some of the conditions out there, as well as the trees, the landscaping on the properties and within the city's right of way. So the first image on the left is down up circle, is looking to the south. You'll see that there's kind of a green belt here, and then there's a split rail fence along Birds Hill Nature Area. So the envision is that the sidewalk would probably go in this area somewhere. We kind of jump over the bridge at M14 because we're going to be tying into the existing sidewalk that's on the east side of that bridge. But we will then start from the south edge of the bridge and continue on down the Sunset. So these are some images of the properties and some of the vegetation and trees along the curb line. This is Cooley Street, where we already have a sidewalk on the west side with a crosswalk here. This is, we're looking at an opportunity to add a crosswalk so there can be access to the school. This is the Sunset Newport intersection. We're looking north. So Sunset, where the sidewalk would come down on the right side of the screen and go to the right on the north side of Sunset. So again, some utilities and poles, as well as some trees and vegetation. This is also where we would be looking at putting additional crosswalks in. Looking down Sunset, some photos of some of the properties and the trees and the landscaping along the curb line. Next image here is a Pomona intersection with landscaping right up on the backside of the curb with nice boulders. This is moving further east of Pomona and some of the vegetation. I think that's supposed to be east, but a little bit further east along the road as well, showing some of the landscaping and the trees. And this is just west of the curve. The curve and the Sunset's right around here. So this is along what it looks like along the curb line. As we get a little bit east of the curve, you'll see additional trees and vegetation. And a little bit closer to the Vesper intersection, landscaping and trees and vegetation again. So this is the Vesper intersection, and we'd be coordinating with the future project, Vesper Brookside intersection project to identify a location for a crosswalk there as well. So that's kind of a quick overview of the existing conditions. I'm sure many of the people on the call are very aware of those conditions. This slide, we're going to transition into some of the concepts that we came up with to try to see what type of impacts and just generate some conversation on if there's preferred alternatives or preferred ways to handle certain properties. So the alignment is shown in red. Again, it's on the east side of Newport, north side of Sunset. We actually came up with 3 different options or concepts. Again, these are just to generate conversation. We're going to be performing a lot of public engagement, especially with each of the property owners that would be impacted by this project. We definitely want to sit down and talk with you about these impacts and try to minimize those impacts the best way possible. This is a Newport segment. So to the north is to the left. So this is Down Up Circle. The park is just to the north here, or just to the upper part of the page. To the south and Sunset is to the right. We should kind of identify the right-of-way lines here. Those have been surveyed and pulled in to this aerial image. The purple is kind of a concept for where the sidewalk might be placed. And the green, like in this area, kind of shows the area of influence of where we would have to adjust the grading that the contractor might be working in. And then the blue line that you see here, there's different segments that we think that we might need a retaining wall. And we try to provide a little image of what that might look like with a little retaining wall and build a sidewalk there adjacent to the road. And that's so we don't disturb any more ground further onto the property. So the use of retaining walls, not that we want to try to do that every place, but we definitely want to try to minimize impacts. And sometimes by using those retaining walls, we can minimize disturbance further onto someone's property. So again, we're kind of generally following along the curb is the way we proposed this. We looked at a variety of other options on Newport and felt like those probably weren't going to be viable. And that's because one of the city standards is to locate the sidewalk about 1 foot off the right of way. And if we were to do that here, we would be far into the park, and here just far into the properties, when on the west side, we're kind of replicating that design. So we felt for the Newport, we probably didn't have multiple options here. This would probably be more realistic of what we would anticipate in our design. But we are very open to conversations on this to try to minimize impacts to the property owners. The next is our first concept on Sunset. So this is on the north side of Sunset. This concept follows the city standard of placing the sidewalk 1 foot off the right of way. So you have the right of way line, and then you put the sidewalk about a foot off of that. And this little cross section kind of shows about 6 inches, but the intent is to be very close to the right of way line, about 6 inches to a foot off of it. When we look at that, you can see the purple is the sidewalk. You'll see, and I forgot to mention on Newport too, we have these red X's here, and those are anticipated tree removals based on that concept. So we definitely are interested in the impacts to vegetation and trees and landscaping, and input hearing from the residents on those impacts. And also in this concept, you'll see the blue line, there's different areas where we think a retaining wall might be needed. And again, it's just a concept for conversation purposes, but this is our concept number 1. You'll see on the right side, lower right, is the retaining wall cross section. So you see the blue retaining wall and the sidewalk. In many cases, this retaining wall would prevent us from going back further onto people's properties and impacting further vegetation. Should also be noted, you see a lot of green on this. That's would generally be area that would be kind of cleared out for visual sight lines and security and safety standpoint. I'll go, this takes us to the bend of Sunset. The next slide is still concept 1, the same philosophy of the 1 foot off the right of way. This continues further along all the way down to the end of the project. And again, you'll see the purple line, magenta line there for the sidewalk. You'll see some blue area for the possible retaining wall, and then X's for possible tree impacts. So that's one concept. The next concept deviates from that city standard and tries to really focus on preserving trees. Again, the purple or the magenta is the proposed sidewalk. The green is kind of the grading area, and the X's, red X's, are possible tree impacts, tree removals. The blue lines represent possible areas for retaining walls. So in this place, or in this concept, we're trying to navigate around as much as we can between the right of way and the curb line of the road to place the sidewalk in a place to minimize those impacts. But there still are impacts here. And so you'll see some red X's on a few parcels here, going all the way to the bend in the road. Again, some places where I have retaining wall, it will look very similar to this image below. The second portion, or the second half of Sunset, again, the purple line showing the sidewalk, some blue retaining walls, some red X's for some of the tree impacts. And then we had a third concept. This third concept pulls the sidewalk very close to the curb line. It provides a little bit of movement around certain obstacles, but for the most part, sticks to trying to keep it close to the road. The purple, again, is the sidewalk. You'll see the red X's for some tree impacts. We have blue lines for retaining walls again. And then also, I guess we'd call this parallel to the curb option. The second half of Sunset, very close to the road. Again, we have X's for the tree impacts. So those are the three concepts that have been developed so far. I think the way we view these are, again, like talking points to have conversations on this. Our intent is to definitely sit down with property owners to talk through those options, because maybe one concept works great for one property and the other concept works better for another. But in comparing those three concepts, we just wanted to go through and look at how many trees were impacted, what the landscaping would be impacted, if we need temporary grading easements. And so we kind of tallied some key critical components here of each concept. The concept one, the one that was very close to the right-of-way line, impacts the most trees. We're estimating that's about 80 trees. We definitely understand that concept would have a significant impact on landscaping, as well as when I mentioned the green area, trying to clear out some of that area to provide that visibility. That has a significant impact. It would require additional temporary grading easements onto people's properties to build that sidewalk. But it would provide a consistent larger buffer, which we have received some requests to have more buffer between the sidewalk and the road. And it does provide a more consistent, like a straighter path for users. Concept two, the one that we were trying to navigate around trees, we were able to reduce the tree impact down to around 30 trees, trying to avoid many of the larger diameter trees. Would require some temporary grading easements, but not as much as concept one. Doesn't have as big a buffer to the road. There are some places that it would be right up against the curb. And it's a little bit more winding. So sometimes it's not as preferred by bikers and walkers. Concept three, the one that was parallel to the road, impacts actually a lot more trees, 78 trees than concept two. It does save some landscaping and screening, but there's definitely an impact. It would also require even fewer temporary grading easements, and does provide a little buffer to the road, but it's consistent along most of the length of the project, and it does provide a straight path for the sidewalk and the users. So those are the three main options or concepts that have been worked through thus far to try to generate conversations on the design. So we definitely want to talk about the possible impacts to the property owners and to the residents. There's potential temporary work in the private property to allow the sidewalk to blend better into the existing ground and landscaping. That basically would be those temporary grading easements that we would have to work with each property owner on, wherever a temporary grading easement is needed, we would work with the property owner on that. The portions of the residential driveways approaches would be disturbed, but also replaced in equal or better condition between the sidewalk and the road. And that also raises a little question too. In general, when we design a sidewalk, we try to grade it so it drains towards the road and not onto people's property. So in many cases where it is draining backwards, we have to look at trying to see what we can do to minimize the drainage impacts on that. Some of the retaining walls would not be too large. We're looking at some at a minimum about 1 foot to maybe 3 feet tall. Again, it's all based on property by property and the grading of the ground. Those retaining walls would be the maintenance responsibility of the city. Some of the trees and landscaping features would be impacted and removed as part of the project. And once the project's completed, the property owners would be responsible for clearing snow off the sidewalk in front of the property. So we do want to mention that we are going to take every effort we can to minimize the impacts, and we will work directly with the property owners to talk about those impacts and see what we can do to try to minimize and mitigate those. Many people also ask about what is it going to be like during construction, and so we have a slide here that kind of addresses that. Usually during construction, all the driveways have to be accessible during construction, but there are periods of time when the sidewalk is being constructed that the sidewalk would have to be built into the driveway, and the driveway might not be accessible for a day or a couple days. Those times are highly coordinated with the property owner, so you know exactly when to expect that. Emergency vehicle access is maintained all the time, as well as mail, trash, and recycling services. On-street parking would likely be restricted during construction. Contractor would probably need to use some of that area for staging and working from. We haven't developed any maintenance of traffic yet. We're still kind of early on in the concept phase. So we haven't looked at the traffic control yet, but it's possible that we might detour one lane or both lanes of traffic. So that might impact local residents. And then during construction, there is noise and dust that should be expected during those hours. Also, when we get into the construction phase, just be assured that the team will work to minimize those disruptions and provide advance notice to you when the construction work might impact your property. The project timeline, our engagement goes from basically now all the way through the end of the project. Our concept design, you might have seen some surveyors out in the field. Those are wage-term employees that were gathering the topographic survey that we use to generate some of these concepts. That design phase would go planned all the way through the end of the year. The bidding of the project, when you put it out to gather or have contractors actually bid on the project to see who would win the project, would likely be in April of next year, with a construction timeline of summer, probably extending into the fall. So kind of wrapping up the presentation here, only a couple more slides, and we're going to open it up to question and answer time, and definitely want to get feedback from all of you. Some of the questions that we're interested in, maybe these can serve as prompts. There are, do you have any questions for us? Do you have any general concerns about the project? Are there features that you would like to see prioritized? Is there anything specific about your property that you'd like us to consider? There's also a survey that is out there on the webpage for this project, and I'll bring that up here shortly too. But this survey is going to be open until about August 18th. We've gathered some of the feedback that already, and I think, Kayla, how many did we have? About 30 participants so far, roughly?
Yes, we have had 32 responses so far.
Okay. definitely encourage all the residents to take that survey and provide feedback. And some follow-up steps. All the comments that we receive, we will summarize those and post to the website within about a week of this meeting. We're looking for opportunities for public input through these community meetings, as well as online, the online survey that we have. The sidewalk design decisions will consider community input and feedback and preferences, and technical feasibility, and as well as costs. We are going to have more public engagement opportunities. We're also going to coordinate directly with many of the impacted property owners, actually all the properties that are impacted. We will coordinate with you on a one-on-one basis to make sure that we hear all your concerns and work with you in the best way possible to make this project least impactful as possible. We do encourage you to feel free to reach out to the project team at any time to request individual meetings, although I'm sure we're going to be reaching out to you as well on that. The last slide has a link to the project website, as well as a link to the survey. Also has contact information for myself and Carmel. And I would encourage you to, if you don't feel like giving me a call, or if you want to follow up with an email, please do that. That is entered into our record as well. Let me just pull up the project website very quick. So if you click on that project link, oh, that was the wrong one, sorry. There we go. This is what the project website looks like. It talks about the meeting, and then it also has a public survey is currently available. So you can click on that link, and I'll take you right to the survey, and you can fill that out. And this talks about some of the things that we've just talked about on the why is the project being done, what does it include, the funding sources, impacts, and the timeline. So Kayla, I think, do you want me to leave this slide up for our question and answer period?
Yeah, that's fine. We may jump to other slides depending on questions that come in. And just a reminder, I know we saw a question come in about how to unmute, how to raise your hand. The mute button, it's you're going to see a microphone. It's probably in the lower left corner of your screen. If you don't have a ribbon at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, if you hover over the bottom and top, it may show up. It kind of depends on your the program you're running Zoom through, and whether your window's at full extent or a minimized extent. But you should see that microphone. It'll have a red slash through it when you're muted, and then that will be removed whenever you are unmuted. Raising your hand, I may have given you some misinformation in the first slide. I think that was an old note, but it looks like raised hand is now actually under reactions. So you might see a little smiley face with a plus sign next to it. That's how it could vary depending on the version of Zoom you have as well. But my Zoom currently is showing reactions with a smiley. I click that, and that gives me the raise hand button. So if you're still having any trouble, again, you could turn on your video and verbal or physically raise your hand. Well, I'll try to watch for those too. But at this point, we're open for questions. I haven't seen any questions come in to the chat window other than those logistical questions, but you can submit those there. Or we'll take verbal questions. And I see John has his hand raised. John, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, thanks Chris for the information and for all the project managers being here and engaging with us. Really appreciate it. One question, and I want a sort of clarification. It sounds like I'm an individual property owner. Sounds like you're going to reach out to us about our specific issues, and I'm not sure that the purpose of tonight is really to get into the nitty gritty, but I did want to ask in general about the slide that has the X's. On my particular property, I actually have quite a large stand of pretty old growth trees, right, sort of in the prime zone there. And it's hard for, I mean, it's pretty small. It's hard to tell just by the X's, like, is that just like the entire stand being taken down or particular trees? And if that's something, if that's the kind of thing that you would engage with us one-on-one about, and even potentially maybe coming out and showing which trees we're talking about. If that's the kind of thing we can hope for, that would certainly put me at ease. With that being a large stand, I'll just say it's 1204 Sunset right there. And I noticed in every concept I'm losing some trees, which of course I am because it's a whole little conglomeration there. But it would help put me at ease to know that some were going to be saved, or like what the ultimate path through there was going to be, that kind of thing. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. Thanks for your comments, John. Appreciate that. As you mentioned, yes, we're definitely going to meet with you, and I believe we can work out a way to actually do a site visit outside too. So I'm more than happy to meet up with you and talk through some of those options. Yeah, I apologize that it's hard to see the X's, but we try to be very transparent here. So the slide deck, as well as some of these concepts, would be added to the website, and we can also bring those to the meetings or even share those with you on email. And we can definitely work through those, or talk through some of those options and see what we can do to minimize that impact.
And Chris, just to clarify for next steps in that, and John, if you haven't completed that survey already, please do. There is a space, and we're reviewing those as they come in, but I don't believe the project team has done the follow-up calls or emails on that, but there is a space in that survey to request if you'd like to meet directly with the project team members for one of those one-on-one discussions. So that'd be a way you could submit that request, or Chris's contact information, Chris and Carmel's contact information that was on the last slide. We'll definitely hit that slide again before we end the meeting, and you could send an email or a phone call for direct contact.
Yeah, I would encourage you, John. We'll definitely connect on it, and I would hope that, frankly, I would be talking, well, at least the team here. I know Carmel and Brianna will probably be also meeting with residents here, but I would hope that we will have met with each property owner a couple times on this project to talk through this.
I appreciate that. And you mentioned, sorry, just have a quick follow-up. You mentioned some flexibility, so like in this winding concept too that preserves trees. Is there flexibility even within that for curves that we don't see here potentially, you know, depending on
Yes.
Your individual meetings?
Yes, definitely. Again, these are kind of concepts to get the conversation going, and you know, one is kind of following the more like the city standard, and we see there's significant impacts, and then we kind of took another look at it to see what can we do to minimize that. But if we get out there, and frankly, each parcel is going to be probably very much tailored for the sidewalk. And if we see that there's ways to save more trees and wind things around in a way to do that, we're very open for that.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a question I see in the chat, and then I do see we have a couple of hands raised, so we'll get to you, Rick and Elizabeth. First, there is a question: why not put a crossing in at the entrance to the woods? Is that something, Chris, that you could respond to, the crossing?
I'm not certain about where the entrance is.
Okay, it looks like Martin, if you can provide any clarification.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So I'm trying to understand the root cause of the issue and why the sidewalk's needed. I actually live on the opposite side of the road, and my concern is the fact that well, the disruption is going to be an issue to me, obviously, and I don't know how long it's going to take, and I also missed how much investment this is going to take. So I'm scratching my head as to what you're actually trying to fix here, because it's not a thoroughfare as far as millions of people a day. I don't really understand it, but from what I think I understand, you're trying to put a sidewalk in from Newport Road to the entrance of the woods, halfway down Sunset. Is that correct?
Chris, could
The
you?
best
The
for
nature
Brooks.
reserve.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes,
That's
to
the
Best Brooks intersection, yes.
Okay, so that's where the entrance to the nature park is. So my concern is, why not just put a crossing at that point and you don't have to do anything else?
Thanks, Martin. So it sounds like, Chris, if you could address maybe the overall master planning efforts around transportation and sidewalk connectivity for the city. I think that's one question there, the kind of like the overarching reasons behind this project. And also the cost and funding mechanism I heard. And Martin, I think you said there was a third category of your question.
I'm not sure the issue you're fixing. I don't know what's the
Okay,
reason
yeah.
really.
I think that will be part of that. Yeah, the purpose and need. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I'll jump in on that, Kayla. Just to reintroduce myself here, Chris mentioned who I was at the beginning. My name is Nick Hutchinson. I'm the city engineer for the city of Ann Arbor. And I can speak to some of those kind of higher level planning questions. So the city has, it's been a goal to fill more gaps in the sidewalk system for some years now. And there's a long history to that, but kind of to make a long story short, we have developed first of all, we identified where all the gaps in our network were. And in order to start looking at prioritizing those so we can start working on filling sidewalk gaps, we set up a prioritization system, which takes a whole lot of different factors into account. Things like requests, proximities to schools, parks, transit, whether the adjacent street is a major or local street, several other things as well, safety considerations as well. And using that prioritization system, we kind of scored all of the gaps in the city, and that's how this rose to the top, as in that planning effort. And I wouldn't say the exact top, but up there as a priority. It checks a lot of those boxes, being the access to transit, proximity to schools, parks, things like that. So that is the general explanation, I guess, for the planning process that went into this. And then that prioritization system we used to start generating projects in the city's capital improvement plan. And this went into the plan a few years ago. And now it's, we're looking to implement it. So in general terms, that's the planning process that kind of goes into this. I think the other question was funding. Chris had hit a couple of things about funding. We are using some federal aid funds on this, and our new sidewalk millage that was approved by voters back in November. I think the total, now we haven't really started designing this yet, but the planning level cost estimate for this project on Sunset and Newport together, I think is just over $1 million. I think it's 1.1 million total. And that includes not just the construction cost, but all the design costs and administration and inspection and testing and everything. So I think that covered most of what I was.
You've answered most of the question. I've got to say, $1 million seems like a lot of money for not very much as far as the issue you're trying to resolve here. I've got to say, I'm slightly shocked by the number as well. But I don't see enough people outside of my house every day. And the fortunate thing for COVID is I'm sat here every day, and there's not a lot of people to warrant $1 million worth of sidewalk, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Martin. And then I remember, Martin, you did have one other comment. You mentioned the disruption and a question about how long the disruption might take, I believe was in your original comments, a question. So Chris or Nick, if one of you might address the expected construction timeframe.
Well, construction would probably start in the summertime and probably would extend to probably 3 or 4 months. We haven't really gotten into the details to define exactly what we think it'll take, but generally based on the length and the amount of work, that's kind of our anticipated duration.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm going to now take a question from Rick. I see your hand is raised. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Kayla. First of all, I thank you for this meeting. And second, I I support everything Martin said in terms of the cost benefit. But my primary concern as a neighborhood resident, person who walks that street frequently, taking out that number of trees will dramatically change the character of that street. And I don't see the benefit there. I think the stretch of Newport to go to the Bird Hills entrance and a crosswalk at Vesper for that park entrance would be useful. But all of Sunset does not have sidewalk on that, what is that, the north side of the street. So I just don't see the rationale for taking down that many trees, changing the character of the neighborhood to that extent, and stopping at Vesper. Why not? Why aren't we doing the whole street? Not that I advocate that. I'd prefer not to have any of that sidewalk. There's, as Martin said, there's plenty of sidewalk for the number of people that use that block, couple blocks. So I just don't understand why this is a priority. And I feel for the people whose trees are going to be taken down and for everybody in the neighborhood who enjoys the character that those trees provide.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm gonna, before I turn that over to Chris to address, I'm gonna read a couple of the items from the chat that I think build on a similar sentiment. One is that I would like to understand why this section of Sunset is prioritized over nearby areas without an existing sidewalk on either side, i.e. where is the need? There's already a sidewalk on one side of Sunset and part of Newport. Why are we adding sidewalk along these sections? So those couple that I see, and I'll keep scrolling down, but there may be more, but those couple seem to be a similar sentiment to Rick's about the rationale and the purpose and need slide that is pulled up still. I know Chris has reviewed this previously, but if there is anything that Chris or Nick would like to add in response to that, please do.
Okay,
I can,
there's one other comment I just want to jump in that relates to this, that is asking why can't the sidewalk across the street be considered a completion of the sidewalk gap? So Nick, if you could also talk about the reasoning for having the sidewalk on both sides of the street and what defines the gap to go along with that.
yeah, I can address a couple of those things. One, I guess I'll start with that last part, you know, and what is considered a gap in the system. What we consider a gap in the system is any place within the public right of way that is parallel to a street that does not have sidewalk currently. Whether that's on one side or both sides, it's still considered a gap. To get into the, you know, other places in the neighborhood, no sidewalks on either side. In our prioritization system, that is a criteria. You know, whether there's whether there's sidewalk on both sides of the street or not. If there's not, then it gets a slightly higher score in that category. But there are, like, I think it's 8 or 9 different criterias in that prioritization system. So while some of those other streets may get a little bit more points because they don't have any sidewalk, they don't get points for a lot of other things that this one does. So, you know, there's a balancing out there in that prioritization. It's not just looking at one criteria over all the others.
Thank you, Nick. One question, I'll take one hand raised. So Elizabeth, I see your hand is raised. Let's go ahead over to you now. And you are muted currently, so you'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, my husband's going to be answering or asking the questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello guys, again, as an affected resident here, the purpose of the gaps, so the real gap from our place into town is actually at the bottom of Sunset, but there is no sidewalk. So if the goal of the city is zero emissions, climate-proofed future, etc., then you would like to encourage me to be transport free. Therefore, I need the ability to walk from my property into town. This does not resolve that issue for me, an individual property owner who will be affected by this. The comments earlier about sidewalk capacity, I think really Anybody that is considering this needs to spend some time in the area. Survey the area. You've clearly surveyed it with tools and from an engineering perspective, but you've not actually spent any time in the area looking. There's no clickers in the road to measure cars, although most of the cars are traveling too quickly for you to measure that. So maybe traffic calming would be a better way of spending some money. But ultimately, the question I want to get to is, when will the affected owners know exactly what the full impact will be to them? And at what point in the process will they know that? Will that ever be past the point of no return? Because option one removes half of my front property and we only have woods at the back. So I will cut down 1,000 trees if you do this. Thank you.
Thank you. So I heard the question was about knowing exactly when the impact will be known. And there was also a question related to the, or comment rather, but the gap that's at the other end of Sunset towards town. And I know Nick has talked already about the prioritization process, but if there is anything that you happen to know offhand, Nick, and in terms of other gaps in the sidewalk system along Sunset, then that might be helpful here. So I think those are the two themes that I heard needing to be
The
addressed.
flawed assumptions.
Yeah, the
we heard
flawed,
that. We
the
heard that.
flawed
Yeah.
Prioritization plan.
We heard
Yeah,
that.
we understand that. We contest it, but please answer some of our other
And
questions.
then the next question is,
And we do have other questions.
1 mile of impervious ground and 80 trees removed, is that also in line with Ann Arbor's future plans? You know, another
Sure.
mile
So
of impervious walkway.
Yeah.
thank you. So
Certainly,
if I could,
with the A20 plan,
Yeah.
where
I
we're
am
trying
gonna-
to reach carbon.
all right, I'm sorry there. I had to mute you there, Elizabeth, and your husband. I've got to get these questions answered so we can move on to the next, and we can circle back to you if we've got additional time. So I'm handing it over then to, I'm not sure if it'll be Nick or Chris, but again, question on the timing of the impact, question about the other, I heard the rebuttal of the understanding of the prioritization process. So it sounds like revisiting the prioritization process maybe isn't the request, but if there's anything you can add about where that other gap in Sunset towards town, where that falls in the priority list, perhaps that helps.
I'll speak to the coordination on the impacts. So we're going to take all the input that we receive in the feedback and go back and obviously look at the plan, come up with ideas, but also before we even kind of get too far into that, we want to meet with the property owners and actually walk through their site a little bit to see what we can do. So when we come back to the designing table, we can actually do that with very informed thoughts and intent. As those plans are updated, we will again reach out to the property owners and coordinate on those updates so they fully understand the impacts. And so definitely everybody that's on that property along the project limits would be coordinated with before this project is out to bid for the contractor. Then maybe Nick might want to address.
Yeah, Nick, if there's anything you can add in terms of, again, the prioritization or the gap, the other gap that was mentioned on Sunset towards town.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add with that. I don't know where the other parts of Sunset fall in the prioritization system off the top of my head. But yeah, understood. I mean, I see the need for, if we want to, connect, into the downtown area, that is definitely a need that's out there, certainly.
And the cemetery and down the hill, basically.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm seeing another comment in the chat window that this one is about the noise on Sunset due to M14 and hoping for tree removal to be minimized. Concern about whether the trees may survive, those that are saved, and a straighter sidewalk would be better. Buffers for pedestrians to be protected from buses and large trucks. The importance of ADA compliance, and some comments related to snow removal, and it looks like some support for a future city maintained sidewalk, winter maintenance, I believe there. So it looks like largely comments there, not questions. And so then we'll pass it back to a verbal question. Lucas, your hand is next. You can go ahead and ask your question or share your comment.
Hey guys, thank you for setting this up, and I apologize for the quality of the sound. I'm currently on the road. I am one of the impacted residents of this proposal. I frequently go to both Bird Hills and Sunset Brook parks, and I live on the other side of the street, so I have to cross the street to do that. And I can tell you, if someone's going to go for a hike of multiple miles, crossing the street 20 additional feet is not a problem whatsoever. I've also been working from home since 2019, and I echo some of Martin's comments. I think there's a lack of understanding of the pedestrian population on Sunset Road. It is not extensively busy road to begin with, even in the summer months, and even on the weekends. I don't think there are real benefits in using this funding for this project. Beyond the impact on the existing residents, I think this is somewhat of a misread on what the population in this area actually wants. If this is actually being funded by the Surface Transportation Program, what is within the scope of this project are sound barriers, it seems, on the basis of what I could find in the websites. One of the things that is obviously needed in that area are sound barriers for M14. Residents on that side of the road have been having to deal with a poorly constructed highway that is incredibly loud at peak hours. And that pushes all residents to use their front yards as opposed to their backyards, because their backyards are extremely loud. And with construction associated with this, with less trees protecting residents on the other side of the road, it really is a complete misread on what the residents on this area actually want. We don't want more sound in front of our properties. We don't want our front yards to become substantially smaller and deforested. What we want is funding to actually be used constructively in things that we need. Sunset Road is not pedestrian heavy. There are not even a lot of cars because it doesn't connect to any major highways. So it is, the pedestrian population there is not huge. So I have three questions for you guys. So first of all, do you have data on the pedestrian population of Sunset Road to justify this investment on an area with the same funding from SDP that would be used constructively, in my opinion, with sound barriers, but instead would be used for the sidewalk? My second question is, under each scenario that you've laid out, regardless of the actual path, trees will go down. Do you know what the sound impact of these trees are going down will be? Because for residents across the street that don't have to deal with as much sound from M14 as we do, they will be impacted as well, because those trees ultimately protect that side of the city as a whole as additional sound barriers. And my third question is there a percentage that you can assign to these $1 million that's actually coming from SDP that could be used more productively, in my opinion, with the construction of sound barriers?
All right, thank you, Lucas. And so I'll take these questions. I think I've noted them, and I'll read a couple at a time here for our project team members to respond to. So the pedestrian population data, I guess that's one offhand. I'll turn that to either Chris or Nick to address the way that we consider or don't consider pedestrian population data in a location that does not yet have a pedestrian facility.
I'll probably defer to Nick on that.
Yeah, the actual pedestrian count data is something that's not in the prioritization system right now. In many cases, it's hard to count pedestrian volumes where there is no pedestrian facility at the time. So that's not something that was included in the prioritization system.
Okay.
At this
Well,
time.
just one point there. There is a sidewalk across the street, even with that sidewalk. I think measuring the count of pedestrians on a daily basis there, I think could be interesting to highlight that really one sidewalk on that road is more than enough. And it doesn't really get congested even with one sidewalk.
Thank
So
you,
I think
Lucas.
it's
And
important to highlight
thank you,
that.
Lucas. I'll make sure we get to your other questions here. So I think, as you heard from Nick, that is not a data point that is considered in the prioritization because there is no pedestrian space existing, and the larger vision is to provide a continuous designated pedestrian space. The second was about a sound barrier and whether the funding from the STP funds could be used towards a sound barrier. That I heard as the second question, and then also the fourth kind of tied in the question of what percentage of the $1 million is coming from the STP fund. So I wonder if you could take both of those together, Nick or Chris.
Yeah, I can step in on that one too. I believe it's about 50-50 in terms of what's coming from the STP versus the city new sidewalk millage. There's actually some money that's going to that would come from parks as well for the section on Newport that's in front of the Bird Hills parking lot area. But the funding could not be redirected towards a sound barrier. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. For the city's portion of that money, that is from the new sidewalk millage. It can only be spent on constructing new sidewalks. The STP money has been programmed, through a whole regional planning process. It can be moved to something else, but I don't know all the details about how sound walls get constructed, but I know that happens at the state level, probably with local input. I know there's been a lot of talk about it along M14, but that's something that generally city funds wouldn't be used for. It would be state funds, if I understand it correctly. And I'm pretty certain that that money could not be redirected towards that purpose.
All right, thank you, Nick. The other question was about whether we know anything on the sound impact that will be made based on trees that are potentially removed to this project. And my guess is that we don't have that type of information. I'm not sure how we'd assess that, but I will make sure with the engineers. Is that something that we would or could assess, how the sound on a street would be changed without those trees being present?
Generally, not typical on a project. I would have to go back and talk with the team to see if there is criteria that we can use to assess that or not. So I don't have an answer.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Lucas. We'll note that it's something, if we can gather additional information that could be incorporated in the meeting summary, but otherwise that may not be within the scope of this type of a project. So I see various comments that have been made in the chat. I'm not seeing any new questions at this time, except for it looks like one just came in. Is there a forum in which the priority formula can be challenged? The definition of a sidewalk gap that was mentioned misses the point of connectivity. All zero sidewalk street projects should be priority over streets with one sidewalk. Okay, so because there's sidewalk on one side of the road, this is a suggestion that this should not be as high of a priority for completing the sidewalk network. Nick, is there anything you can say about how that prioritization formula is set and how revisions would potentially be made?
We've been reviewing it multiple times for revisions. We've gotten input from the public before, and we've made changes to it based on that input. So, I mean, we'll certainly take that input. In fact, the factor of sidewalks not being on both sides of the street versus existing on one side of the street was not a criteria in the original prioritization system that we had, and that was feedback that we got from the public and added that as criteria. So that it doesn't trump all the other criteria, but it is a criteria in the system, and it has been added based on public feedback. So we're always happy to hear, what people have, what people's thoughts are on that. And if anybody ever wanted to, I would be happy to go through it with them in more detail as well.
Thank you, Nick. And I see 3 more hands that are raised. One says iPad. I see Deborah and I see Heather. And I am swapping back and forth between a verbal question and then a question from the chat, just to make sure we're giving good opportunity to both. So that's the strategy I'm using here, but we'll go to the iPad hand raise. It just says iPad. So if that's you, please go ahead and speak. And I did see Sarah Hollingshead says that their hand is raised. So maybe that's you. Maybe your name isn't showing up. Deborah and Heather are the other 2 I've got, but one just says iPad.
Still muted.
Do you hear us?
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
We got you now.
Okay. Yeah, this
Okay.
is the Hollings
Okay,
heads.
I'm a
Great.
licensed professional civil engineer also. Typically, when you do projects like this, it requires that you do a cost benefit analysis. Has anything been done that actually shows that there's a necessity to do this? There's a lot of the questions have been, if you come actually spend some time in our neighborhood, you don't see people walking out here on the road. Is that there's very few that even walk on the sidewalks that there. Is that the benefit of this thing is minuscule, and you should address that. My second question is there any way to really stop this other than the city council voting against it or obtaining an environmental lawyer that's going to sue the city so that we can do an environmental study on this before we proceed with it? Because there are environmental impacts involved here that haven't been addressed, quite frankly, as some of the speakers have raised.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I have some questions. Number 1, it's redundant to put a sidewalk on Newport when there are 2 safe crossings from Newport over to the other side of Newport, the west side, for Forsyth as well as Wines. So why are we going to have a redundant sidewalk when we already have a sidewalk with safe crosswalks from Sunset to Newport and Wines? The greatest traffic influx has been from a large subdivision past the bridge on the west side of Newport, where there are many, many families. There is a sidewalk there already that takes them right to Wines, right to Forsyth, and we could put a crossing over directly to Bird Park. Why do we need to have a redundant sidewalk on Newport when there are trees there that people have paid money to put in, and we've nurtured and see these trees grow for 31 years, and you're going to rip them out to put a redundant sidewalk when nobody has done a study that says the traffic has tremendously increased and we got to have one there. So that's another question I have.
Okay, great. Thank you to the Hollingsteds, I believe. And the questions are about cost benefit analysis and how this would be stopped, any process or next steps for those who have concerns with opposition, and why this sidewalk is being constructed with the view that this is redundant to the space that is already available. So the cost, in regard to the cost benefit analysis, I know that the need, the purpose, the city's overall vision and philosophy and prioritization has been thoroughly addressed. So I'm not sure, Chris or Nick, what you might add in terms of cost benefit, because this is intended to achieve those larger visions and goals set by the city. But I'll hand it to you.
Right. That I was going to kind of echo that. It was a high priority project, and That was the main philosophy in the pursuit of the project, as well as, checking off the boxes for addressing the transportation plan, and also identifying the complete streets, as well as some of the key components that this project would provide. So it's less about the cost benefit, but more of the benefit of accomplishing many of the goals set forth by the city. And then maybe Nick might want to talk about the process with the city council.
Yeah, I can speak to that real briefly. I guess what I would say on that is that we're here to collect feedback from everybody, and we very much appreciate getting that. I know there's a lot of people that are opposed to having the sidewalk go in. That's feedback, and we will take it. We will discuss it internally, have some other conversations, and see where that goes. I can't say where that will or will not go right now, but so I guess stay tuned on that. We'll probably have some discussion. We may have some discussion with the council members from this ward as well, and we'll see what comes out of that. That's as much as I can really say right now, until we look at that a little bit more.
Okay, is there anything then that you would add about the belief of this being a redundant sidewalk? I feel that that's a similar to some of the comments we've heard previously that have been addressed, but I'll turn it to the engineers.
Yeah, I think that's this. Yeah, I think that's kind of the same. The thing it gets back to the prioritization of sidewalks, and whether we should look at putting sidewalks solely in places where there's no sidewalks on either side of the street before going into an area where there already is one. And like I said, that's something that we take into account in our prioritization process that's there. But I think that's the issue of a redundant sidewalk is the same thing. Ultimately, the goal, the city's goal would be to have sidewalks on both sides of the street.
Great, thank you, Nick. And Greg, I see your hand is raised there. Can I come back to you? I've got two others that are ahead of you, but I noted that you're in line there. One question that's from the chat window was, I'm sorry, I lost it here. Is it possible to narrow the street in order to achieve this space for the sidewalk?
We've reached out to transportation team, as well as talking with the water treatment plant, and both those units do not want to reduce the width of the road. So for the operation of the treatment plant, as well as the transportation plan, the width of the road, they want it to stay.
Okay, so in order for probably the trucks and machinery equipment that need to service the treatment plant, it sounds like is a primary need there. And so Deborah, I've got Deborah, Heather, and then I lost you there. I think it was Greg. Yes, Greg. Okay, you're my third one. So let's run through those three. Deborah, go ahead.
Yes, hello. I'm not seeing me. Are you?
Yep, we hear you.
Yeah, do you see me? Because
I see you. Yes, I see you as well.
No one else does. Okay. First of all, I just have to say that I'm not sure if I'm devastated and grieving or so angry I have a hard time speaking. So please don't feel that my comments are killing the messenger. We know that you are the messenger. I'm glad that Chris started to talk about the water treatment plant, because that's an issue that no one has raised before. So I have 3 comments and then 2 questions. The first comment is about the water treatment plant. Many of us are first of all, we're concerned about the environment and the loss of those trees. But people are also have spent a great deal of time and money and effort planting bushes and shrubberies, especially those of us who are across from the water treatment plant. Those of you who don't live in the neighborhood may not believe it, but it's a lovely plant to look at every day, and it's wonderful to hear the beep, beep, beep of the gates coming, closing, and opening again, and the plants we love it. Right? No, we don't. But we live with it because we've been able to create barriers so that, as Lucas says, we can use our front yard since most of us can't use our back. So that's another why people are, I think, very distressed about this, is because no one has addressed the issue of what happens that those bushes, the shrub, trees are taken down, in addition to the environmental impact, but also of the water treatment plant. Second comment is, let's be honest, when you say trees are impacted, you mean they're going to be cut. So that's language, and it's important to know. The third comment I want to make is that some people may assume that this is a street that has mostly people who are retired or who have lived here a long time. Within the last several years, we've had a great number of people move into the neighborhood. It's an increasingly younger neighborhood. We have many families who have children who would likely be impacted by having a sidewalk on the north side. And even when we spoke to those families, they were against it. So this is not just a NIMBY old people thing, this is younger families. So my two questions are, one is that several of us have collected data from the neighbors that summarize a lot of what you're hearing here today. I've prepared a document with that summary, and I'd like to know where would I send it so that the people the engineers, the city council, whoever should see that document gets it. That's number one. Number two is, as we spoke to people, and as you're hearing today, people are very data hungry. And so I think it would be much to our benefit and yours too, if there was a list somewhere, someplace that would tell us where we can come up with data. For instance, how do you prioritize sidewalks? Okay, if you have no sidewalks, but you have one but not two, how is that less of a priority? What about competing city initiatives? So a couple of people have already talked about the Zero initiative. How is it impacted by taking down trees? What are those are competing priorities? How are those two weighed against one another? So if you could give us the information where to find that kind of information, also where we can send any other documentation or things we have, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I think the answer to your question about where to send the data that you've compiled, please send that to Chris Wall as the project manager, cwall@a2gov.org, and we can get back to that that contact information slide. But I believe that Chris's contact info is also on the project website. There will be. It is there. Yep.
I'll go down to the last slide.
Great.
There.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Chris. So yes, Deborah, you could please submit that to Chris, and it will be compiled with all of the feedback that's being received. It will be reviewed by the project team. It will be discussed in the decision-making process. And in terms of competing priorities, I will turn that to either Nick or Chris if there's anything that you can address at this time, or if that's something you'd like to incorporate into a meeting follow-up.
I'll mention something on that real quickly, and Deborah, I'm very glad you brought that up, because the competing priorities is a very good point. In terms of trying to meet our 820 initiatives, one of the big things in that is creating a more walkable community. And in the past, these questions have come up when we've filled sidewalk gaps in the past, and in talking to our environment and sustainability department, they tend to support constructing sidewalks as part of that goal of a more walkable community. Now, is there a level at some point where the amount of tree removal outweighs that? There may be at some point. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but you're absolutely right. Those are to some degree, some level of competing priorities. And, we don't want to have to remove vegetation, which is why we try to come up with the best plans we can to minimize that as much as possible while still meeting these other goals as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to take Heather and then Greg, and we will close out at that point. We're approaching 8:30 where we scheduled the meeting until. So please go ahead, Heather.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just wanted to reiterate, the A20 plan and the tree development website from the city of Ann Arbor talks about canopy tree loss and fees imposed for development of areas and imposing fees for every tree that's lost. And I'm curious how that fits into this budget. But that's more of a comment, although if you have an answer, I would love it. But my real question, we've covered trees pretty clearly. We also have a drainage problem on Sunset. We have a drainage problem. I live at 904, and there's a drainage problem between my property and the Brooks intersection every time we have a hard rain. And adding more impervious cement is not going to help that. And I've noticed on your diagrams, it looks like they'll be adding a retaining wall in that area, perhaps. I don't see how it's going to help our drainage issue. And I'm wondering how the city has the city even looked at drainage in this project? And I would like, it's an actual it's a pretty big problem when we get a severe rain. It goes from curb to curb on Sunset. So I would like to hear somebody talk about drainage.
Great, thank you, Heather. So if there's anything that can be said in regards to the canopy tree loss with respect to the A20 plan, please address that as well as the drainage concerns.
I'll jump in on the canopy loss and then I'll turn it over to Chris on the drainage. What I will say is, we don't have obviously we don't have specific plans yet, but we will be working with the city forester's office on replanting. So that will, they have a formula for mitigating, canopy loss. Obviously new plantings aren't going to be the same right away, but we will work with them and go through the proper procedures for replanting.
Okay, and
Yeah.
Chris on drainage?
Sure. So Heather, appreciate the comment on the drainage, and that's kind of a site-specific issue that as this project gets underway, we would definitely like to look into. So, frankly, I'd love to come out and kind of understand better what the issue is and see how this might impact it. Obviously, we'd like to not make it worse, and so that would be the whole intent, is to try to not do that. If there's other issues in terms of like beyond the project, like onto your property, or then I could work with Nick to see if there's other avenues to make improvements. But generally, from the sidewalk where we're impacting that to the road, we want to try to improve that drainage situation. So I'll be happy to talk to you with that, about that, as well as any of the other property
Are
owners
we
that
in
might
there,
have
the
similar
participants?
as well as any of the other homeowners that might have similar issues.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll now turn it to Greg, and that will wrap us up and we'll close out. And just so you know, if we didn't get to your question, please submit by email. You see all of the contact information. Give Chris a phone call or submit by email to Chris or Carmel. And we will do a meeting follow-up as well to address any questions that were in the chat that we may have missed or didn't get to yet. So over to you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. I'll probably end up summarizing a few of everyone's comments, but I do appreciate the work you've all put in. I honestly don't believe we need this project. I'll just get that out right up front. I've talked with enough neighbors and I've thought about this. I look at the project site every day from my office. Literally watch it constantly, and I agree with so many of the comments about there's just really not enough traffic to justify this. I realize that's not the overall effort. I'm a planner myself. I'm actually a transportation planner. I have just a couple of quick questions up front to ask the professionals involved, Wade Trim and Mr. Hutchinson. You know, have you walked the site? Have you been here for more than a few minutes? Have you gotten to know this place that other residents know so well? Are you willing to listen? And this is really to council. Are you willing to learn and listen to your residents who are impacted by this project every day and will be during construction and going forward? Because this is quality of life. It really is very meaningful to all the people that you've heard from and all that haven't been able to comment. So those are a couple of questions. Whether you want to address them now, they're more rhetorical. But my bottom line is there's a perfectly effective sidewalk across the street on the south side of the street. I'm really talking about Sunset. Ideally located where it belongs, where 95% of the residents of Water Hill can reach it by streets and other sidewalks today. It's really it's a single loaded street, if you will. It's a half a neighborhood that ends in Sunset. So the sidewalk on the south side is perfectly adequate for local distribution and movements to the school, to Bird Hills. Sunset Brooks is not technically a park. I think it's a little disingenuous to characterize it as a park. It's really a nature area with a little path going through it that is not ADA accessible and wouldn't qualify for any of the normal benefits of the connectedness that we're talking about. I guess my bottom line is please don't let the idea of a perfect or complete street get in the way of a perfectly practical and effective street that we have today, street and sidewalk that we have today. We don't need a perfect and complete street here. We have a perfectly fine street right now. And I'd hate to see the money being used in this way, the resources, the loss of 30 trees. For some people, the loss of one tree in their property will be devastating, let alone 30 or 70 or 80. We do not need this project. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, but I don't think it's necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate you providing a summary of many of the points that have been made and some additional points of reflection for the project team and for council members. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to close us up. And as I mentioned, if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out by phone, by email, submit them in the chat as you're leaving. The final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to reopen. There was a demographic questionnaire that was available at the beginning of the meeting. Many participants already completed that. You are not expected or asked to complete that again. We want only one response per person. But if you missed that and you'd be willing to complete the demographic questionnaire now, that helps us understand who we're hearing from. So this is optional and anonymous. This is part of the city's equitable engagement efforts to get a better understanding of the demographics of our public meeting participants. So with that, over to you, Chris.
Thank you. I just want to mention, I appreciate everybody taking time out of their evenings to spend with us and to provide input and some amazing questions. If you haven't been heard, like Kayla said, please do reach out to us. Or if you have additional comments or questions, feel free to do that. I do encourage you to visit the website and take the survey and to send us emails on this. And we will be compiling all the comments and posting it to the website. And as many emails as I get, we can also set up a like kind of a email blast to update people on the project as well. So I definitely want to make everyone aware that we want to meet with you. We want to talk through the project. We want to try to see what we can do to minimize a tree being cut down and to try to make this project the best it can be. given the circumstances. But again, feel free to continue to reach out to us. We do appreciate all the comments. I do know Nick, you know, he's a resident of the city. I grew up in the city as well. Went to all my schooling was in Ann Arbor. And so we take a lot of pride in working with the city residents. And even though there might be some difficult circumstances or issues, we still want to hear from you and meet with you on this project. So again, thank you for your time. Continue to reach out to us, and we're looking forward to meeting with you at your home.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.